1945. The war in the Pacific was breathing its final ragged breaths. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke, mud, and something else, the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. The once proud Japanese empire was collapsing. Across the islands, camps filled with prisoners of war, soldiers, nurses, civilians, all waiting, all wondering what the dawn would bring. And among them stood a group of Japanese women, former nurses, secretaries, and wives of officers, now prisoners in a world that had turned upside down. The night before, the guards had ordered them to be ready at dawn. No explanation, no mercy in their tone, just a simple, chilling command. Line up at sunrise. They didn't know whether they would see another morning. Some whispered prayers. Others stared into the dark horizon, clutching keepsakes from home. A photo, a ribbon, a rosary. The silence was thick enough to break the heart. Then, as the first light of dawn painted the camp in soft orange hues, boots crunched against the gravel. A line of women stood trembling, their faces pale, their breaths short, the weight of the unknown pressing against their chests. And what happened next would be something none of them could ever forget. The sky was bruised in shades of grey and violet when the sound of boots broke the silence. A voice shouted in clipped English, followed by another in Japanese translation, harsh, cold, and commanding. The women inside the barracks stirred from their uneasy sleep, eyes still heavy from exhaustion, bodies trembling from the chill that crept through the thin wooden walls. Dawn had not yet broken, but already. They knew what the call meant. It was an order, and in the camps of war, orders could mean anything. A routine inspection, a transfer, a punishment, or something far worse. Inside the dim barrack, a small oil lamp flickered weakly. It cast long, trembling shadows across the faces of women who no longer looked like the proud nurses and civilians they once were. Their uniforms, once symbols of duty, now hung in tatters. Sleeves frayed, hems torn, colors faded by rain and dirt. They had been captured months ago, during the final chaos of the Pacific War. Their days were now marked not by dates, but by hunger, silence, and survival. Someone whispered, "Line up, outside." The words passed from mouth to mouth like a ghostly echo. No one dared to question, only to obey. The youngest among them, barely 20, fumbled to tie her hair back with a strip of cloth. Another older woman adjusted the collar of a friend beside her, an instinct of motherly care that refused to die even in captivity. In that moment, no one was a soldier or an enemy, only a human being trying to hold on to dignity amid despair. When they stepped outside, the air bit into their skin. The camp stretched before them, silent except for the low hum of the wind moving through the trees and the distant clang of a metal gate. The ground beneath their bare feet was cold, wet from the night's dew. Some women shivered, others clasped their hands together, whispering quiet prayers into the dawn that had yet to arrive. The guards were already there, silhouettes against the dying night. Their rifles rested casually against their shoulders, their faces half hidden by shadows and steel helmets. They did not shout. They didn't need to. The silent command in their posture was enough. The women knew exactly where to stand, how to move, when to stop. They had learned this rhythm, the rhythm of captivity, a pattern that offered no comfort, only survival. A long line began to form, uneven and hesitant at first. Some stood tall, others hunched slightly as if expecting a blow. The line wavered as the women took their places, shoulder to shoulder, facing the faint glimmer of the eastern sky. The horizon was bleeding from black into orange, a color that should have meant warmth, but instead carried the taste of dread. No one knew why they had been called out. The guards had said nothing the night before, only the brief command to assemble at dawn. Rumors had already spread like wildfire through the camp, talk of executions, relocations, or retribution. Some of the women feared they would be made examples, accused of defiance or sabotage. Others, perhaps more naively, hoped it might mean release. But hope was dangerous here. Hope had a way of cutting deeper than despair when it was betrayed. The silence was heavy. Every breath was a weight. Somewhere in the back of the line, a woman began to hum softly, a tune from childhood, barely audible. It was a song about the sea, about home. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as others caught the rhythm in their minds. It was not loud enough for the guards to hear, but in that secret whisper of melody, they found something that made them feel less alone. The camp itself was a skeleton of order and decay. Rows of wooden huts lined the open square, their roofs sagging under the weight of rain and neglect. The flagpole stood bare now, its tattered cloth long removed. Beyond the barbed wire, the forest swayed gently, indifferent to human suffering. Birds began to stir in the trees, their calls soft and distant, as though nature was waking to a world that had forgotten compassion. Minutes passed like hours. The guards paced up and down the line, their boots crunching in the gravel. The rhythmic sound set hearts pounding. Every step a question, every glance a verdict. One guard stopped in front of a woman whose eyes were fixed firmly ahead. He stared at her for a moment too long, his expression unreadable. Then he moved on. The woman exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Behind her, another woman, older and frailer, began to sway. The hunger had taken its toll, her legs could barely support her. The woman beside her reached out discreetly, slipping a hand under her arm to steady her. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. In silence, they carried one another. Somewhere to the left, a young nurse clenched her fists at her sides. Her knuckles were white, her lips trembling. She had been captured while tending to wounded soldiers in the Philippines. The memories haunted her. The screams, the fire, the unbearable loss. She had once believed in honor, in sacrifice. Now she wasn't sure what she believed in anymore. The world had changed too suddenly, too brutally. The wind shifted, carrying with it. A few tried to comfort themselves with small gestures. One adjusted her friend's collar. Another brushed dust from her sleeve. These quiet movements were acts of rebellion in their own way. Proof that even in captivity, they would not surrender their humanity. The guards continued pacing, eyes scanning the line with mechanical precision. None of them spoke of what was to come. Their faces betrayed nothing, no cruelty, no kindness, just the cold mask of duty. The waiting stretched on, unbearable in its stillness. Then, somewhere beyond the fence, a rooster crowed. The sound was so ordinary, so painfully normal, that it shattered the tension for a fleeting second. One of the younger women bit her lip to keep from crying. Another whispered under her breath, "Maybe today, it will end." The light grew brighter now, cutting through the fog that lingered over the camp. The shapes of trees became clearer, the outlines of the watchtowers sharper. A soft wind blew through the line, tugging at the loose strands of hair and the torn hems of uniforms. It was almost poetic, how the world continued to move while they stood frozen in fear. No one yet knew that this dawn, this gathering, would mark a turning point, not just for the war but for their souls. Within hours, they would come face to face with something they had not expected. Not punishment, not vengeance, but something altogether different. Something that would remind them that even in the ashes of defeat, compassion could still exist. For now, though, all they had was the moment, the slow crawl of light, the sound of breath and boots, and the heavy, trembling silence of women caught between past and future. The silence broke like glass. A single voice, sharp and commanding, pierced the morning air, an American officer's tone, steady and sure, cutting through the haze of fear. The women flinched instinctively, as if struck by the sound itself. After so many months of orders barked in anger, the calmness of this voice felt strange, almost foreign. He spoke again, slower this time, his words crisp and deliberate. Then came the translation, rough but clear enough to understand. "You will be moved." For a long, breathless moment, no one reacted. The words hung in the cold air, too unexpected to process. Moved. What did that mean? Moved to where? Some exchanged brief, nervous glances, their minds racing through every possibility. In the camps, moved could mean anything. Relocation, interrogation, punishment. Hope was a dangerous word, one that could shatter the moment it was spoken aloud. The officer stepped forward, boots crunching against the gravel. He was tall, his uniform immaculate despite the dust that hung in the morning air. His expression was unreadable, neither cruel nor kind, but composed, as though he carried the weight of a decision that demanded restraint. Behind him stood a group of soldiers, their rifles slung casually across their backs. They watched silently, their eyes scanning the rows of women who stood trembling before them. The women's hearts pounded. One of them, a nurse named Kiko, clutched the edge of her sleeve, her nails digging into the fabric. Her mind flashed back to nights of interrogation, to guards shouting, to the endless hunger that had hollowed her face. Moved. The word spun in her head like a cruel trick. She thought of her brother, who had died fighting on a distant island. Would she now join him? A guard barked another command. The women tensed. But then, instead of forcing them down or lining them up for inspection, the Americans motioned toward the open gate. Beyond it, The women could see shapes emerging through the early morning mist. Trucks. Several of them, parked in a neat row, engines idling softly. The smell of fuel drifted across the air, strangely comforting in its familiarity. The Japanese interpreter repeated the words, slower this time. "You will be moved to another camp." Still, disbelief hung in the air. The women looked at one another, searching for confirmation, for any sign that this wasn't some cruel deception. For months, they had been conditioned to expect only hardship. The idea of being moved to safety felt unreal, like a dream conjured by a starving mind. The officer gestured again, and one of the soldiers stepped forward. He carried a box, something that glinted faintly in the sunlight. As he opened it, the scent hit them first. Bread, fresh bread. The women froze. For so long, their world had been filled with the bitter taste of rationed gruel, of cold rice and water thick with ash. The smell alone felt like a miracle. One soldier began handing out pieces, carefully, respectfully, as though aware of the fragility of the moment. At first, the women didn't move. They had been taught that food, when given by an enemy, could be a trap. But then one of the older women, her hands shaking, her face drawn with age and hunger, took a piece. She stared at it for a long moment, then bowed slightly, whispering a faint arigat. The soldier hesitated, then nodded back. That single gesture broke the invisible wall between them. Slowly, the others followed, taking the small pieces of bread, holding them as though they were relics. Some cried silently, tears tracing the dirt on their faces. Others just stared at their hands, unable to believe what they were seeing or tasting. Kiko lifted the bread to her lips. The first bite filled her with warmth she hadn't felt in months. Her throat tightened, and tears spilled down her cheeks. It wasn't just food, it was dignity. It was proof that even in defeat, they were still seen as human beings. The officer's gaze softened slightly as he watched them. For a brief second, the world seemed to stand still. The sun climbing higher, the camp bathed in light, and the lines between enemies fading like mist. Women were ordered to board the trucks. Their movements were hesitant at first, cautious, as if the earth itself might betray them. But when the first woman climbed onto the back of the vehicle and saw the benches, the blankets, and the small canteens of water, something inside her shifted. This was no march toward punishment. It was something entirely different. A wave of disbelief rippled through the group. They had been told the Americans were merciless, that capture meant humiliation. Yet here they were, being offered water, food, and a seat on a truck that promised movement, not backward into darkness, but forward into something new. One woman whispered, "Are we being freed?" Another shook her head quickly. "No, they don't free enemies." But even as she said it, her voice trembled with the smallest flicker of hope. As the trucks filled, the camp that had been their prison began to look smaller, almost fragile in the morning light. The barbed wire gleamed faintly, the guard towers casting long shadows that stretched toward the forest. It was hard to believe they were leaving this place alive. The officer gave a final command. The engines roared louder. The gates opened fully, creaking like the sigh of something ancient and tired. Dust rose in the air as the first truck rolled forward. The women inside held onto each other, some from fear, others from the need to believe this was real. Keiko looked back one last time. The barracks where they had slept, cried, and prayed was disappearing behind her. She thought of the nights spent listening to the cries of the wounded, of the quiet conversations about home that always ended in silence. Now, that life seemed like another lifetime, distant, faded. The convoy moved slowly, the sound of engines echoing against the hills. The road ahead was lined with trees, stripped bare by war, their branches reaching upward like skeletal hands. The wind carried the faint smell of salt, the sea somewhere nearby. Inside the truck, no one spoke at first. The rumble of the engine and the crunch of gravel beneath the tires filled the silence. But as the miles passed, something began to change. Shoulders relaxed. Faces softened. For the first time, the women allowed themselves to breathe deeply. They were still prisoners. The war was not yet over, but the fear that had bound them for so long was beginning to fade. It was replaced by something gentler. Gratitude, confusion, maybe even wonder. An American soldier sitting near the tailgate glanced back. His eyes met Kiko's for a brief moment. Neither said a word, but in that silent exchange, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet acknowledgement that the war had taken. The roads stretched endlessly ahead, winding through the scorched earth of what once had been villages, homes, and quiet farmland. The trucks rattled along the dirt path, leaving behind the prison camp, and all the memories buried within its barbed wire fences. The air was dry, carrying the faint scent of smoke and salt, the smell of a land that had burned for too long. The women sat closely together in the back of the trucks, their shoulders brushing, their silence thick but no longer suffocating. The world beyond the fence was both strange and familiar, alive with colors and movement they hadn't seen in months. Some of them had forgotten what trees looked like in daylight, what the breeze felt like when it wasn't filled with dust and fear. Now, as sunlight streamed through the passing leaves, they felt its warmth touch their faces. It wasn't the harsh heat of a soldier's torch or the glare of a searchlight. It was the real, gentle warmth of morning. It carried with it something unspoken, a reminder that the world had not entirely turned to ash. Kiko sat near the edge of the truck bed, her fingers gripping the wooden railing as the vehicle bumped along uneven ground. The rhythmic sound of the wheels against gravel became a heartbeat, steady, grounding. Around her, women of all ages sat silently, some with eyes closed, others staring out at the endless horizon. Each was lost in her own thoughts, her own fragile reckoning with what survival meant now. When the trucks had first started moving, no one had dared to speak. The fear was still too close, too raw. But as the miles rolled by, a quiet murmur began to rise among them. Questions whispered between breaths. Where are we going? Is this another camp? Will we be safe there? No one had answers. Even the interpreter seated near the front had stopped speaking, his gaze fixed firmly ahead. Kiko glanced at the soldiers riding at the back. Their faces were calm, almost wary. They didn't sneer or shout, didn't look at their passengers with hatred or pity. Only a kind of quiet understanding. She wondered what they thought when they looked at her. At all of them. Were they thinking of their own families, of the women waiting back home? Did they see enemies or survivors? The road curved, revealing stretches of open land, scarred by bomb craters, and the remains of villages reduced to rubble. Smoke rose faintly in the distance, a ghostly reminder of battles that had raged not long before. The women stared at the ruins as they passed, some recognizing the architecture, the shape of a shrine, the outline of a school. It could have been any village. Theirs, perhaps, torn apart by forces far beyond their control. One of the younger women, barely 19, began to weep quietly. Her tears fell silently onto her lap, unnoticed by most until the woman beside her gently reached out and held her hand. No words were exchanged. There was nothing to say. The younger one kept crying, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs, her head bowed. And yet, in that gesture, one woman comforting another, there was something profoundly human. The convoy stopped briefly on a hilltop overlooking a river valley. The soldiers climbed out, stretching their legs, scanning the area. The women remained seated, watching. Below them, the river glistened in the morning light, winding through a landscape of devastation and beauty. Birds circled lazily overhead. For the first time in months, the women saw movement that wasn't caused by war, a current flowing freely, unbothered by boundaries. Kiko found herself unable to look away. The sight of the river stirred something deep inside her. Memories of home, of summer days spent near the water, of laughter that now felt like a story from another life. The tears that had refused to fall during the months of captivity began to sting her eyes now. She turned her face away, embarrassed, but no one judged her. Others were crying too, silently, each lost in her own private sorrow. After a short while, the soldiers motioned for them to stay seated. They handed out canteens of water and small packets of food, biscuits, dried fruit, things so simple yet unimaginable only days earlier. The women hesitated at first, still unsure whether to trust the kindness. But hunger overcame fear. They ate slowly, savoring every crumb as if each bite was a piece of the life they had lost. As they ate, one of the American soldiers stood near the truck's edge, leaning against the side. He was young, probably no older than 25, his face shadowed by fatigue. He looked at them, not as captives, not as enemies, but as people. When his eyes met Keiko's, she didn't look away this time. For a fleeting second, she saw something that transcended war, a flicker of shared exhaustion, of compassion. The convoy moved again. The trucks bounced down the dirt path, crossing bridges that trembled under their weight. With each mile, the landscape began to change. The burned fields. A gentle laugh broke out somewhere in the group, light and unexpected. It startled even those who heard it, like the sound of sunlight breaking through clouds. Soon after, Another joined in. A laugh that wasn't out of joy, but out of sheer disbelief at still being here, breathing, moving towards something unknown. The soldiers didn't stop them. They simply let the moment happen. As the afternoon wore on, fatigue began to settle in. Some of the women leaned against each other, eyes closed, lulled by the steady rhythm of the engine. The landscape outside grew softer. Rolling hills, distant trees, the glimmer of small towns untouched by fire. Every turn of the wheel carried them farther from the horrors they'd endured, but not far enough to erase them. The past still clung to their skin, their breath, their silence. Kiko found herself thinking about the night before their capture. How she had sat beside a wounded soldier, listening to him whisper the name of his wife as he slipped into death. She had promised to write his family, but never had the chance. The memory haunted her, even now. Yet today, for the first time, it didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a promise. One she still might fulfill someday. The trucks finally slowed as the sun began to set, the horizon painted in hues of red and gold. Ahead lay a larger encampment. Not a prison, but a transition point. Tents stood neatly arranged, smoke rising from cooking fires. Soldiers moved between them, some carrying supplies, others talking quietly. The place was busy but peaceful, alive with order and routine. The women were helped off the trucks one by one. Their legs were stiff, their movements uncertain, but the soldiers offered steadying hands. No one shouted, no one forced them. The tone of the air itself had changed. It was no longer filled with authority, but with something gentler. When Kiko stepped down, her feet met solid ground that didn't feel hostile. She looked around in disbelief. The air here smelled of cooked food, of clean canvas, of smoke that didn't burn your throat. She could hear laughter somewhere in the distance. Not mocking, but real. They were led to an open area where medical tents stood. A few nurses, American, perhaps, moved among them, offering blankets and water, guiding them gently. One of the Japanese women hesitated when an American nurse reached to touch her arm, instinctively flinching. But the nurse only smiled, her expression soft, reassuring. "You're safe now," she said in slow, careful English. The woman stared at her for a long time before nodding. That simple act, a stranger's kindness without demand, struck deeper than any speech. As night descended, the women were given a place to rest. The sky above was a deep indigo, stars faint but visible through the drifting clouds. Some of the women sat quietly near a fire, warming their hands. Others wrapped themselves in the thin blankets they'd been given. No one spoke loudly, they didn't need to. The silence now felt different, peaceful, not oppressive. Kiko sat a little apart from the others, staring into the flames. The light flickered across her face, illuminating her hollow cheeks and tired eyes. Yet behind that exhaustion was something new, a glimmer of peace she hadn't felt in years. She thought of the officer who had spoken that morning, of the soldiers who had shown restraint, of the nurse who had offered her water without judgment. The war had taken everything from her home, her family, her faith in the goodness of people. But that morning it had given something back, not in grand gestures or sweeping speeches, but in the smallest of acts: a piece of bread, a shared glance, a gentle hand. Those moments became her proof that humanity could survive even in the ruins. As the fire crackled, she whispered a quiet prayer, not for victory, not even for peace, but for memory. That someday, when the war was just a story told by the survivors, people would remember that kindness existed even in the darkest times. Above her, the stars flickered like distant embers, watching silently over a world that was finally learning to heal.